So thank you all for coming, and this has to do with the 2020 emissions inventory. There's never been an inventory quite like this before, so there was a lot of information we have to give to all the minor sources, and we had a really good turnout in each one of those cities, um, especially Albuquerque. So they're calling it the inventory, the 2020 minor source emissions inventory stakeholder outreach, and Tasha has coined the term messy, MSEI. So we're going with it. Um, how do you move it ahead? Arrow. Okay, so quickly, I'll go over this quickly. We're going to talk about what is an emissions inventory, actuals versus permitted, because I get that question. Why can't we just use our permitted values? Shocking, I know. The purpose of an emissions inventory and preparing, how are you going to prepare? So this was actually given to the audience was companies and operators. Um, air, how that works, and questions at the end. So getting into the basics, the fundamentals, what is an emissions inventory? Well, it's an accounting by source of the amount of air pollutants discharged into the atmosphere, the actual amount being discharged into the atmosphere. What regulatory authority gives AQB the right to ask for this? It is 20.2.73.300 New Mexico Administrative Code, which is a really interesting regulation because, as you know, that's also for NOIs. So the beginning of it, 0.200, it's 0.200, is for notice of intent, and then 0.300 is for emissions inventory, which personally I think they need to be separated. I'm kind of campaigning for that in the near future. So what is the purpose of emissions inventory? This is a list of the reasons why we collect actual emissions. Permitted amounts usually are an inflated amount, right? Fairly based on conservative amounts, plus, so we don't know what's actually going into the atmosphere. Plus, some of the issues may be, as some of us feel and have talked about, that maybe the estimated amounts and the permits may not be the actual amounts. So we need to know what's actually going into the atmosphere. For modeling analysis and human risk assessments, that information for humans, human health is called NATA, the National Air Toxics Assessment. The NATA data you can find through EPA, which what they've been doing over the years is using default data. And they fill in gaps where we don't submit data. There's a lot of inventories that New Mexico does not participate in or submit any data for. So they use default data. Thank you. So also emission trends to find out if the control strategies are working, assessing the effectiveness of air pollution policies. So this data that you see is going to be really, really important. So this is one I wanted to discuss. Actual versus permitted emissions. Actual emissions are not permitted or allowable emissions. This is two separately different things. And I've had that question asked several times, so you can see I really emphasized it here. It's important that you use your actual emissions for the inventory. Actual emissions are the real emissions coming out of a piece of equipment under any circumstances. So that's routine processes, activities, steady state, which is the same thing. Startup, shutdown, maintenance, malfunctions, and includes excess emissions across the board for all permits. Title V they're the ones, the major sources we've been collecting on a yearly basis. And they are supposed to be submitting their excess emissions with every inventory on a yearly basis. For minor sources, we have to make this very clear. Permitted sources are the emissions that are based on an estimated production. And that's what's listed in your permit. And I also want to add that the permits that we're looking at include all minor source except for NPRs. So all the GCPs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, oil and gas, NOIs, NSR, new source reviews, streamlines, and of course Title V's will be included too.
Then you said the NOI, and then after that was the Nissan review. Let's say it again.
NOI, new source.
New source. Right. Sorry. Thank you.
So, because I know I've had operators ask me, call me up and say, well, what's wrong with the amount? What's wrong with the number on the permit? Why don't I just put that in there? And actually in Title V, we have seen that. So this is a part where everybody comes for, right? They want to know, okay, well, what do I need to do? And this is when everybody all of a sudden sits up in their chair and pulls out their paper and pencil. Record keeping, this is what you need to do. How do you prepare for minor source emissions inventory? Okay, so this is a slide Tasha wanted me to put in. So one of the most important things is that you need to begin record keeping beginning January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. Emissions window, submittal window is open January 1st, 2021 and due April 1st, 2021. So that's the timeline for what we're doing. So what you need to keep records of is actual operating hours of each piece of equipment. This is really important for permitters to know too, and also C&E. So you know what we're asking for. And in case I have any questions, because from what I understand, some of the permitters have asked me questions about that they have received questions from their company, the company that they're working with with the permit about the emissions inventory. So it's good that you know this. We're asking for actual, we're asking that they keep records of actual operating hours per piece of equipment. Title V is not asking for exempt because we never have. We're not going to ask for exempt pieces of equipment, but everything else is included. And they really need to go back to their permit and look at what pieces of equipment is going to come up, are permitted, because those are the ones that we are looking at for emissions inventory. Overall facility production. This is really important for the construction industry. The type of fuel combusted, how much of the fuel was combusted, because let's say you have an engine and it's only running 5 hours a day. So I think actual operating hours per day is important, because they'll have to figure that out by the end of the year. And how much fuel was combusted, they can usually figure out. I believe they have receipts for all of that. I had a conversation about this a week ago. They usually should have receipts for all of that. The type of material processed, yes. Right. Exempt's not included.
Are you looking at
Yes.
Yeah, even though they're not permitted.
Yeah, that one's a hard one. If it's not permitted, I don't know how we're going to go after. That's a really hard one to get them to do.
I should mention, the exempt equipment is not allowed in the streamline city. They will be exempt.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Exempt equipment is not allowed in the streamline permit.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. You're absolutely right. Title Fives have exempt equipment, and from what I understand, you may correct me here. GCP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and oil and gas, and streamlines and NOIs do not have exempt equipment, so we can go after all of the equipment there. Yes. Can they?
Anything that's like
Okay.
Part 72
Okay.
can be allowed.
Mm.
Sorry, I can't look at my generators. Some Title 5 have a lot. My plan will have a lot of standby generators.
Yes. Yes. Wait. We're doing both. We're going to do Title Fives as we've always done it. We're not going to change the way they do things, but minor sources are supposed to submit everything, where Title Fives don't have to submit their exempt because we've never asked them to do that before. So for materials processed, this is a good example is like a crusher that's crushing some gravel, but it's using some piece of equipment to do that that's probably running on natural gas or some other fuel. So that piece of equipment needs the operating hours and the fuel type, the fuel combusted, and the materials processed here may end up being ore or granite, rocks, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm.
Are you specifying the frequency that they need to be records, or you just want the annual total? If you're not requiring them to do it a daily versus weekly, or is any of that specified, or it's just up to them to get the annual?
It's up to them to get the annual, but we have a lot of construction groups that are asking the question, how am I supposed to do this? You know, da da da. So there are records we're recommending on a daily basis. That way they remember to do it on a daily basis because it may vary from day to day, and especially if they're portable. So, but they are responsible for the total year. But they did ask, several have asked, how do you want me to do this? And how are we supposed to do it? Record it on a piece of paper, record it in Excel. Roseanne Small Business has, they have some good record keeping for GCPs. Have you seen those, all the documents? So we've recommended, those are online. Okay, on to the next slide. So the pollutants to be included are all the criteria pollutants, and we're including greenhouse gases, 3, methane, carbon dioxide, and dinitrogen oxide, VOCs, and HAPs. How Title V records it now, usually how it's done in Title V, HAPs is going to be included in VOCs unless they have something like more than 1 ton. Don't quote me at this. I know that we've been talking about it, how exactly we want that done. And I don't think we came up with a final decision. Do you remember? It's part of our FAQs, and I don't think we've quite finalized that yet. Okay, so in case you are not aware of AIR is the tool we use. It's the Air Emissions Inventory Reporting tool for collecting your emissions inventory. It's a web-based tool. So if you get on, we've created another web page which is connected to the emissions inventory. So if you go to emissions inventory dropdown, on that page, there's one that says 2020 minor source emissions inventory. But here, let me tell you how to get to AIR, and we'll go over it quickly so you're familiar with what it looks like and what we're collecting. So if you go to the 2020 minor source emissions inventory, Eric made it very clear. Click here for AIR. So no one should get lost, right? So you click there. So you're ready. It's January 1st, 2021. You're ready to input your data. And this is what you're going to see. Creating a new emissions inventory, because there is a lot of issues that we're working with right now. Because as you know, Title V SIs are entered into Tempo, whereas GCP, not all GCP information is, NOI information is not. And also we have companies who have 500 NOIs, who I think, who was it? Devin, I think, said that they've avoided GCPs and Title Fives, just wanted to stay with with NOIs. So how can they do this easily without having to do it manually? Right now, they're doing it manually. So we're working with a contractor on adding these extra buttons to make this a much faster process. So let's say you're completely ready. And so you click here to, you can register for additional facilities and or additional roles. The roles is something will give you access to AIR. We'll talk about that more later. So create a new emissions inventory. You want to select minor because this is going to be your minor source inventory. And your facility, there'll be a drop down or somehow it's going to come up. We're not quite sure what this part's going to look like yet. We've been working with the contractor because for companies who have 200 or 300 facilities, a drop down probably isn't a good way to go. So there's probably going to be a search device of some sort. Reporting year is going to be 2020, and you can create your new annual reporting. You click on the teal colored button. But I want to add to that for those who have many facilities, assure them that they can use the XML data import. The schema is being tested by other companies right now. We have a handful of companies that are testing, and it's working out nicely. So you can put all your data into an XML file and just submit it, and it will auto-populate AIR. So if you're doing this without XML and you're doing this manually, the next screen you'll see is this. And this is a really important screen here. This is one I found that a lot of facility operators were really interested in. So this is what AIR does. It goes to Tempo. You select it on your facility. I think this is Gaucho by Devon. And it will extract, just pull all the pieces of equipment that a data inputter has input into Tempo and list it here. And you see the radio button. This is what you click on when you want to work on that piece of equipment. This is the type. This is a piece of equipment, the type it is. This is the number that Tempo gives it because we can't use their numbers because everybody has a tank number 1, right? Or an engine number 1. So, and then the next column is designation, and this is the name that the company has given it. So this is the number we're always interested in. I know you probably have seen them. I know when I first started working here, I was working in permitting, and I would see these numbers, and I remember asking, what is that number? Oh, well, it's just something Tempo does. But now I understand why. It's for emissions inventory, so we know, who owns this piece of equipment. The next column is a description. It's a water tank. It's a slop oil tank. It's a gun barrel. It's a flare. The next one is the status date. This is where we have a lot of problems. We go to permitting and ask. It says it's been removed, or it says it's a duplicate. Leslie knows, she's seen these. For some reason that shows up. In this last column here, you see there's one with a box and a check in it. And that box and check means that when you have completed filling out your emissions report for 2020, that box and check will appear saying that that piece of equipment is complete. So what you want is all of the pieces of equipment to show that box and check mark, so you know your emissions inventory report is ready for submittal. But what we're going to do right now is go to process Flair, equipment 6, Flair 1, active 11/18/18. One more point. The red arrow here at the bottom. This is something, so for the NOIs and the GCPs we were talking about earlier that don't have their SIs input into Tempo, they have to add it manually. Okay, so that's adding a piece of equipment for NOIs and for GCPs that do not have their equipment already in Tempo. Let me move to the next slide. Then after that, so you clicked on Flair. This is the first screen that you'll see in Air. And see, it's asking for, I don't know if you can see this, but up at the top, it's asking for fuel type. It's a drop down. I selected natural gas, but there's a list of different fuel types, fuel gas, crude oil, blah, blah, blah. Materials consumed, the amount, it has a drop down for unit measure. And the heating fuel value, they need to keep track of that. And this piece right here all has to do with operating hours. So for NOIs, we know is going to be worst case scenario, it's going to be 8760. So this is time hours per day, 24, time days per week, 7, time in weeks per year, 52, then it's 8760. And then this is broken up percentage by season, winter, spring, summer, and fall. Which always reminds me of Carol King. 25%. Now, if you have a facility that only runs, a construction facility that only runs in the spring and the fall, then that's going to be broken up differently. And this is why it's important that they keep track of the amount of hours. And there's a comment section down here at the bottom, which has really been extremely helpful because they do have things to say. And when you're complete with this page, then you'll see this page. Then it tells you up at the top, you're still working on equipment 6, you're still on the Flair, and now these are the pollutants that it pulled from Tempo. And each one of these, so you can fill in each one, the amount, I just threw in some numbers. Tons per year, this is what we're collecting. Shannon, as you were asking, tons per year. Everything we're asking for is tons per year. We're not asking for pounds per hour. Hopefully at sometime in the future we will get that information. The calculation method, there's a drop down, but we've been working with permitting, and I think we came up with calculation methods. There's a list of them accepted by EPA, and we have separated them by tier, like most preferred would be tier 1, like the actual. SEM, stack testing, I don't remember what all is under tier 1. And then tier 2 would be like AP42, glycalc tanks, And then tier 3 would be engineering judgment or engineering guess. Yeah, I think we made those less desirable. So we're asking for preferred methods. And the good thing about this too, just to add, if they didn't use that piece of equipment, which happens a lot in Title V facilities, you have a set emissions to 0 button. So in case you didn't use it, just click that button, everything sets to 0, you can move on. Then you can add a pollutant or remove a pollutant according to gas analysis. So back to this, so once they get this filled out, they have a drop down for calculation methods. We have preferred calculation methods, and I'm really hoping that permitting adopts that too, because that would be nice to ask them to do better record keeping, better monitoring of their emissions. Anyways, then we save and move on. Oh, and then I'm done. So the point, I didn't want to bore the audience to death, so I ruined a lot of stuff and I just made stuff that I could talk about. So one of the things that I really wanted to point, that I pointed out to every group that I spoke to all around the state of New Mexico, is we realize that, especially Angela and I have been looking at this data. Some of these NOIs and some of these permits are really, really old. Really, really super old, 10, 20, 30 years old. And they have not, they're off the radar. We haven't heard from them. They haven't come in for any kind of updates. So if nothing else, there's been some serious cleanup of tempo. We've been using the permitting multi-form to have them officially closed out so they no longer have to hear from us